Hi everyone, this is Allan McKay. Welcome to episode 138. I'm doing the first ever AMA for the podcast, which is Ask Me Anything. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Allan McKay podcast. Allan is an Emmy Award-winning visual effects artist and mentor to many leading industry experts. Listen in as Allan talks with other industry leaders in film, video games, and visual effects about their experience, lessons, and methodology. Allan will teach you pivotal advice to fast-track your career, better your skills, and reach your ultimate dream job. Check out the latest episodes on allanmckay.com.
Okay, so welcome. I'm going to dive right into this. This was a lot of fun. I did an announcement on social media recently, so on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. I put it out there just to say if anyone has questions, let me know, and I'll try to answer as many as I can. And I forget what number I got up to. I did about 10, maybe a little less than that here, just because obviously it took quite a long time to get through these, but I've got dozens or hundreds even of other questions that I'd like to get to in the future. But if you enjoy this and you have specific questions yourself, I'd love to hear from you. So if you want to shoot me an email at amckay@allanmckay.com, put the subject heading as Ask Me Anything, and let me know what your question is, and I'll try and archive these, and I'll do another episode soon, because I think these are a lot of fun, and I think it's a very different platform, because rather than being super specific for me, it's more kind of relaxed, and I kind of get to kind of rant a little bit and get pretty insightful and in-depth into a lot of stuff. So that being said, yeah, hopefully you find this interesting. And lastly, I also put this out on YouTube as well. So if you want to watch the video version of this, just go to YouTube. I'll leave a link in the show notes to my YouTube channel. But if you just Google Allan McKay on Google, I'm sure the YouTube link will show up. And yeah, so let me know what you think of this. I hope you enjoy it. Let's dive in. Okay, just quickly, one of the biggest problems that we face as artists is figuring out how much we're worth. Typically, the situation is that we go into job interviews and we're asked how much we're going to charge. We either shoot ourselves in the foot by saying that we charge less than we're worth, so that way we get the gig, and indirectly end up leaving tens of thousands of dollars accumulatively over time on the table, rather than actually asking what we should be charging. At the same time, you don't want to alienate your employers by asking for too much and leaving yourself out in the cold. So what I've done is I put together a website, check it out, www.vfxrates.com, and this is a chance for you to be able to put in your experience, your discipline, the location you're working, all the good things that will give you a fairly accurate idea of what you and everyone else should be charging in your discipline. This is something that I'm going to continue to build and flesh out over time, but the key thing is actually that I don't want to just showcase how much you should be worth, but also show you and hand you the tools to grow beyond that and to learn to negotiate better, to learn to ask for the right amount of money in the right way. There's lots of additional tools and information I want to hand over to you. Everything's free. Check it out, vfxrates.com. Put in your information and you'll instantly get notified of how much money you should be charging per hour as a VFX artist. vfxrates.com. Okay, so a while back, I put it out there on social media to ask any burning questions that you have that you would like to get answered. And I decided to put together an episode on my podcast specifically answering a lot of these questions. So this is going to be my very first AMA, or as one person already put it, AAA. So instead of Ask Me Anything, Ask Allan Anything. However we want to title it, I'm excited for this because I get asked a lot of really great questions all the time. And rather than just writing a really in-depth response back to each individual person, I thought it'd be really beneficial to be able to answer these for everyone and try and get a lot of really great information out there, however I can share it. So I'm going to go through a couple of questions this time around, ones that I want to answer really in depth. However, I do want to do a lot more of these in the future. Definitely, if you have any questions you'd like answered, shoot me an email at amckay@allanmckay.com with the subject heading Ask Me Anything. And I'll definitely try to include as many of these as I can in upcoming episodes, as well as videos, things like that. Okay, so after posting on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, I got a lot of people submitting questions back to me, and there were a lot of really great ones. However, I've just tried to break it down to just a couple that I want to go through, and let's just see how we go for time. Okay, so the first one is from Devin DuBost, who's actually a student in my mentorship. And he was asking, I'd love to hear the process for creating effects that you've never done before. Do you first brainstorm different approaches, take the one that you believe will fit the situation best, and rush it into comp? Or do you typically R&D and then make the decision on which technique to expand on and then push it into comp? So Devin is inside of my mentorship, and one of the things that we talk about a lot in those lessons, especially inside of the live action series, is always race to comp. In other words, you want to see your effects in context of the entire shot. You want to see how it's all going to work. It's very easy, especially in effects, to work on something and get really in depth with it, get really technical with it, and then later realize that you can't render it out, like it got too heavy to render in the first place, or you finally render it out and realize that the alpha is really transparent because you've been working on a black background the entire time, or maybe your effects are really staccato, or they just don't work well with the composition of the shot. Whatever it might be, the sooner that you get it in the comp, the sooner you see it in context of the final output, and you get a better idea of how it's all coming together. So I always make it a rule of thumb to race to comp, get it in comp as quick as you can. Even just doing very crude, rudimentary animation, just trying to get the timing right, trying to see it in context, and then once you can see it in context of the complete shot, then you can go back and make it look interesting and add all the subtle nuances that will make the shot work. So I think that's like a good rule of thumb to have. But what Devin's saying, though, is more about, when you never approached something in the first place ever before, like a new effect altogether, are you trying out different ideas? Are you trying different things, or do you kind of bank on one and try and get that all the way through? So I think it really comes down to the shot context, what it is and what you're trying to accomplish. If it is something, let's say, like a building being destroyed, or something where the timing, the weight, the gravity, the camera motion, maybe the foreground layers inside of the plate, like the roto, everything else, all play a role, then I probably will, just because I want to see it in conjunction with the talent. Perhaps they're doing something in the shot. It really comes down to that. So in other words, if it is something where all of these other factors are important, then yeah, I'm going to get it pretty crude, but in there quickly just to see the context. But if it is something that I've got like a lot of different things I've got to figure out, I'm probably going to try and tick a lot of those boxes first before I worry about comp or anything like that. So for me, it's more about figuring out like what is the best approach, how are you going to do it. And I think the big mistake with effects, because effects are very problem solver orientated, you've got to solve problems, you've got to figure it out. And I was talking with someone the other day at Weta about this exact thing, that we're both agreeing that you could figure out most of what you need to do before you even start the shot, especially with experience. And I feel like the inexperienced people are typically the ones that just dive right into doing 3D. And they're also the ones that want to make it as complicated as possible because it's cool. I'm going to build this completely procedural rig that's going to drive everything, and I just have one slider and it does it all for me, or whatever. And then you realize later on that you have no control, and you're going to have to break everything that you've done and do twice the amount of work to compensate for the fact that you don't have the controls that you need. And and that's why I'm going to segue for a second, but when I get asked to do demos for Autodesk or other software companies, typically you're showing off these like really cool technical demos, like, this is completely automated, I don't have to do a thing or whatever. But when it comes to real production effect shots, most of the time they're not as elegant as you might think, because you need that absolute control. What is elegant about them is the way that they were approached. The smarter you are, the more senior you are, the more that you're going to tackle the things that are important first. So if I'm doing an explosion or some big sequence, I'm more interested in getting the timing right, like Q1, Q2, Q3, like all the explosions, and getting the gravity to fall at the right speed, the impact to feel right. Making it look cool, isn't as important. Doing all the broad strokes is, and then detailing it all later on, that comes later once you've got everything else locked in. So same thing with this, like you don't need to dive right into 3D right off the bat. A lot of the times I'll sit down with pen and paper and I'll go through and I'll figure out what I think is probably going to be the best way to do something, and I'll get as close as I can. Because again, like I've seen so many juniors try something, they get about 5% in, hit a wall, and then they go and try something else. And they keep doing this over and over and over. And then you see at the very end, like 2 weeks have gone by and they have 20, 30 solutions, 20, 30 attempts, I should say, that were all about 5 or 10% in, but nothing is finished because they didn't ever bank on one thing. They just kind of kept trying different ways instead of really trying to figure out ahead of time, like, what's the best way, and then just trying to stick with it and make it work. So yeah, I'm always going to try to sit down, figure out, okay, like, what do I think is the best scenario? And then broad strokes, try and get through that, get that working, but then get it all the way through the pipeline. Like, once you figure out, if something is going to work, it's better to go through the whole pipeline than to try and start doing the fun part of making it look cool and doing all of that. I remember it's not even one project. There's so many projects I've hired people, and let's say they figure out like a really cool effect that could turn something to ash, and all they have to show for it is one ash flake, but they keep detailing that one thing that'll look amazing. And then when it's time to actually render it out on the final day, they've never actually rendered it yet. They've just been rendering that one little thing, and instead they're noodling it too far. And I've seen it so many times, like, they just can't get it out. They can't render it. It's too heavy, or they finally did and it looks like crap, or whatever it might be. And I'd rather be able to take it through the entire pipeline, get it to render, and then go back and start revising. Because then if I ever get to a point where I get that resistance, like something's too heavy, then I know, okay, well, we went a little bit too far. We can dial it back a little bit because it was working before. So we know it can work. It's just gotten too heavy on the displacement, or something is causing it to slow down. Or we can break it up from there. But when you've never been able to get it all the way through to comp, and that's why the whole race to comp, then you're never going to have that solution. You're going to realize, oh, wait, this wasn't the solution. This never was able to render out and successfully get out the door. So I think it's really critical to kind of figure out what you need to do, have a plan before you even sit down, because 3D, things go wrong all the time. 3D is way more time consuming. I'd rather figure out the solution and then sit down and have a pretty good idea about like which is the right way, but I might have like one or two other backup ways if I need to go that route. But yeah, I'll do the R&D and I'll try to play with it. I'll try and figure it out and take that whichever direction I decided on, try and get that to a point where it's working, and then start going through the whole pipeline, get it through to lighting, shading, rendering, just getting it all set up and then getting it out to comp. And I can see it in context of the entire shot. And then I can get an idea of like what I need to do now that I can see it all together. And I can go back and start to, add in all the things that are going to make it look interesting and continue to work it through the pipeline. And later, if it gets too heavy to render or whatever the issue might be, I know that at one point it was working and this solution is working. So it's just a matter of, knowing where to optimize from that point. So hopefully that makes sense, but it's definitely a broader question, but it's also a really good question because, again, like I feel like there are so many mistakes that people make along the way, and it's more about trying to figure out, do the planning up front, like front load the planning before you get started. And that way you already have a plan of attack when you get in there, rather than kind of like being in the trenches and trying to figure out the big picture when you got that narrow focus. So number 2 was from Ali Abbas. Can you explain the parameters that you lock on for the first meeting with the client? What are those questions which can help to understand what the client wants? So this is a really good question. It's more about what are the questions that I would ask a client to kind of get a better idea of like what they're expecting and things like that. Again, it's such a bigger thing. I'd love to do a video specifically about this subject because it's one that I think is so underrated, yet 9 times out of 10, the problems that we run into later on all stem from not doing your due diligence. In other words, not front loading the questions, figuring out like that you're all on the same page, that you've agreed to everything that they're proposing and vice versa. So typically when I come into a new project, I'm going to ask probably more questions than they'll ask me. And that's because I want to get a better idea of what I'm walking into. And also I want to communicate the things that they mightn't have actually thought of themselves. So in other words, what I would typically do is this. When we first get on the call, one of the first questions I'm ever going to ask them is, what's the schedule? In other words, how soon do you need me to start? And when are you looking at how soon do you need me to start? And when are you looking to deliver the project? This is really critical because it sets the context of everything else. Because let's just say that they wanted to have like a big cliff breaking apart and like falling in the ocean. And you could say to them like, okay, great, I can do that. It's going to cost X amount of money and no problem. I'll go do it. And let's say they come around then once you agree to the project and you've gone through everything else you're going to talk about, and then you find out that it's actually due in 3 days. Then, you might say like, wow, like that is impossible. That's like way more work and blah, blah, blah. Same deal that you might talk money and everything else. And then you realize like, wait, this is, I quoted for 3 days when it's actually a 3-month project, whatever it might be. The way that you approach things, their expectations, everything are really critical. So the more that you're able to educate them as well about what you plan to do and why, is really critical too. So understanding the tone, that there's a lot that you need to think about. But when they initially approach me, I'm going to talk to them initially about the schedule, just to make sure we're on the same page. It's going to help me understand how urgent it is, how big a project it is. It might be a tight turnaround. It mightn't be. And then from there, talk more about the project. But more specifically, I'm going to ask them, do they have any reference? Do they have any other movies they've seen or images, whatever that they can show me that demonstrates what they have in mind? Or maybe they have concept work that they've done, or concept work that their client has sent them. Or maybe they have a design sheet, a design Bible, design brief, something that is going to help me get a better understanding of what they actually want to accomplish. So usually what will happen is they'll send me over an NDA, they'll send me that material, and that's easy for me then to say, okay, send me all the material, let's chat later today once I've gone through it all. And that way it's like a 2-part call rather than having this big discussion before you even know what you're doing. Because you might say, okay, there's a cliff breaking apart, and you don't realize that the entire time the camera is actually on the cliff, and you're actually more focused on destroying houses and people running away, and there's trees and other, whatever it might be. You don't know the context of how it's coming together. So without that, it's very difficult to have a good understanding of what you need to do. The other thing is money. I'll bring up money very early on. I'd rather get on the same page right away. And I think most people are afraid to bring up money. They're also afraid to say like that mightn't be achievable because, whatever issues that come up, if you don't like flag them right away as red flags, and warn them that what they're asking for is actually quite demanding, then they're not going to be aware of it. And you're going to be agreeing to something that you later on may not be able to deliver, or it's going to be a lot more work later. And you can't really say, yes, I'll do it all. And then once you're doing the work, start explaining or giving excuses as to why the work isn't done yet, saying like, oh, well, you said it was this, but it's actually that. And it's a lot more work, because they're going to say, well, why didn't you tell me? And either way, like you giving excuses later just doesn't work. So going to them in the very beginning saying, what's the schedule? When do you want me to start? How long till it delivers? Do you have any reference material, things that you can show me to give me a better idea, plates, footage, whatever. So that way I can see the shots or the work in context. From there, I can start to talk about money and other things like that. Sometimes I'm just going to, depending on the client, say like, okay, great. What's your budget? If you're more of a mid or a junior, you typically wouldn't ask a question like that. But I think that you get to a certain point with certain clients where you're both going to show your hand. It's more about getting the job done. So they've already figured out their margins. So they can say, look, we got $50K to do this shot or this sequence. And you can say yes or no, that's not really going to work. Same thing with schedule, things like that. But once you get all those things out of the way, you can start to just talk more about the project freely. And I mention these things because these are the things that will come up to bite you later on. They can either create anxiety or resentment between two people if it doesn't get brought up, because at some point you're either going to think like they might screw me my money, or whatever it is that you're worried about, because you didn't have that discussion. Nothing is set in stone. But if you're both on the same page, you can just focus on getting the job done and doing the best job you can do, and they can just focus on everything else they got to worry about, not worrying about whatever it is that you've not confided in them about yet. So it's a business. This is how it works. Money, all these factors come into play. So you get all those down right away, get them out of the way, and then you can just focus on the actual job. But once you've locked down those key things, mainly money, schedule, visually, anything you have to put it more in context. Once those 3 things are out of the way, you can start to get more into how it's going to be done. Because the how is important, because if they come back and say, well, we would have a giant cliff, I'm using that analogy still, but falling in the ocean, and you come back and say, okay, well, what's the schedule? And I have some other questions like, I noticed there's a bunch of houses on the cliff face as well. what's going to happen with them and blah, blah, blah. They come back and say, well, we've got a week to turn this around, and it's going to be output at resolution is actually a really important one. Just all the things that are to do with the delivering of the project. So if you bring up resolution, they say it's going to be 2K stereo, like stereoscopics. In other words, twice the amount of rendering is involved. That is going to add to the cost, because then now you've got to render out twice as much work. But then asking questions about like the house, the trees, or whatever, if the schedule is really tight, you don't have time to go and break all the houses up or whatever. So you might come back and say, okay, well, I can do the effects, but because of our schedule and the budget, what I'd suggest is that we can't destroy these houses or anything else like that. So I think the ground needs to crack apart and we have all this dust come up, and it might end up covering up a lot of what's going on. And that's probably the best way that we can deliver what we need without specifically needing to do all this extra work, which we don't have time for. And they might say like, wow, I didn't actually think about that, or I didn't know that destroying the houses would be more work. That sounds good. Or no, this is part of the story. We need to destroy this house. And you can say, well, I need more time, or we're going to need to figure out another way to make, to put more emphasis on that. Like we don't actually see the rocks fall in the water or whatever it might be. Again, it's really hard to talk about hypotheticals like this, but for me, I'm just going to hammer them questions because it's painting me a picture of what to expect. And then I can reiterate that back to them and make sure that we both agree. So asking resolution and deliverables, all that sort of thing. So if I'm doing remote freelance work, I'm going to keep talking about effects. I'm going to say, well, look, I'm going to render out the render elements on my end and deliver them to you. Or I want you to do the final rendering and simulations on your end, because that way you have all the assets to integrate into your shots, whatever it might be. I'm going to bring this stuff up very early on, because otherwise it can become a nightmare later on when you start kind of pushing the workload onto each other. Like, hey, we want you to do the rendering. And you're like, well, I thought you guys would render it all. I don't have a render farm, or whatever it might be. And even when I've had clients agree to all this, they've sometimes come back to me later and said, like, we want you to do all the final simulations and then deliver them to us over the internet, like terabytes of data, just like really bad things. And this is why you have to have it all set in stone beforehand. I've had one job where I flew from Sydney to New York, and I asked them on the phone, like, how many render nodes do you have? And they said, we have 30. And then I get there, they have 30 computers with 30 people working on them. And this is like a really simulation heavy job. So I didn't have any computers I could simulate on during the day. It was right away a big red flag. That to me is going to be a lesson where I'm going to say, well, how many dedicated render nodes do you have? Like, okay, great. So that means you have machines free that no one is working on, because I'm going to need this, this, and this. That way they can come back and say yes, or no, we don't. And then you can make a better decision about whether or not you want to do the job. I bring all this stuff up because for me, it's about making sure that you both are on, like I said, on the same page. But more importantly, there are going to be projects where it might sound like a really cool idea, but then you get there and it's a nightmare. Not everyone is as organized as you would expect them to be. And it's better to know what you're walking into. There's a project that I'm about to fly to LA to do right now, and I nearly walked out on that job just because the NDAs were so tight, like the non-disclosure agreements are so tight, they didn't actually show me anything to do with the project until I got there. But without them getting, discussing specifics with me, I didn't know what I'm agreeing to. And the turnaround actually was 4 days, or is going to be 4 days. So for me to agree to something that's very ambitious and I don't actually know what it's going to be, I don't want to promise something that I can't deliver because it's not possible to do. So for me, it got to a point, they're like, well, let's get on the phone and we can discuss the specifics. I'm like, well, look, there are no specifics. If you can't show me what it is you want me to do, like what I'm going to be working on, then, we can't have more conversations. That's always the case. Like, I don't want to walk into something that I don't know, whether they are aware of the amount of work involved or anything like that. So it's better to be able to educate them as much as you can, communicate what you plan to do and offer solutions wherever you can as well. Make sure that you all agree on the final output, the output being the date, what you're delivering. So that might be that you're delivering 2K res effects elements, and you're very specific that maybe you're just doing the effects, that someone else is doing the lighting, or that you're not doing the entire thing, because they might, again, depending on the clients, they might think that you're going to do the animation, the character modeling, everything else. And you're like, no, I'm just doing the effects. Like, all these things you never know until you start asking the questions. I've had that. I've had a project where, they needed a bunch of fire and everything sounded great. And eventually I'm like, oh yeah, by the way, how long are the shots? And they're like, about 10 minutes. This went from, 2K res, 30 frames a second, 12 frame handles, fire simulations, locked off camera. Okay, sounds good. And then 10 minutes per shot. That completely changed everything. And I've never seen a 10-minute shot thing before. And but these things happen all the time. So this is why the more questions you ask, there's always going to be that one that comes in and it's like, oh, this completely changes everything. And for them, they're like, oh, we didn't know. So if you educate them, okay, like, look, all this sounds great, but this one thing is going to affect the schedule. Now I need an extra week just to render or simulate, whatever it might be. The more you can educate them, the better off everyone's going to be. So I just hammer the questions, but the deliverables is so important because if you're able to communicate what dates you're going to deliver the project, when reviews are, all these things, it covers your butt as well. Because if you say, I'm going to do the job is going to take 2 weeks. However, we'll do the first review on this day and the next one 4 days later. At least that way they're on the same page about when to expect stuff. Because if you don't communicate that, they're left in the dark as to when you're going to start showing stuff. And sometimes clients can get quite nervous about not seeing anything and start to freak out. But if they know when they're going to be expecting things, they're a lot more calm. And at the same time, it covers your butt because I've had clients who ask the world and then 2 days later, they're like, we needed to see stuff. What the hell's going on? And it's like, what are you talking about? I just started. So all of these things, all the animosity, all the problems that can come up are usually to do with just lack of communication. The more that you can communicate, the better off you're going to be. CK Hicks was saying, I have an audio, video, photo background. Is the best path to grow to start cranking out test projects or to plunge into structured learning? So I think what CK is saying is it better to just start doing R&D and testing and trying different things out, or to go through like a very specific course, something like that? I think the answer is really to do with trying to find one or two learning resources that you really trust and like really going all in with them. I think that there's so much free information out there that's really great, but there's so much that you don't know who to trust or what to count on. You might watch a 2-hour video. After you watch another one that completely contradicts what the other one said. So it's really frustrating just having that much information and not knowing who to go to. So I think it's better to discover the right training that's going to give you results that you feel like, wow, I'm getting a lot from this, and just double down, just start going in with that. I think the advantage, of course, is like I'm going to mention my mentorship, but I spent a lot of time like really ironing it out and making sure that the pacing was right. Like I like making people sink or swim at the very beginning, because it makes the rest of the course a lot easier to do once you do the hard yards at the beginning. You front load the heavy lifting, and then it's a lot easier from there. Depending on who you go with, I think it's still important to consolidate and find like one or two go-to resources and really go all in with them. But I think in the end, whatever you're doing, it's best to have your own projects that you're putting them into. Because if you're going through training material, it's cool, but it's very protected. It's always going to be within the environment that they set up. But when you try to say, okay, well, I'm going to go and make my own cave troll, I'm going to go and film it and do all this stuff, you're going to be putting yourself in situations that there aren't answers for, and you got to go and figure that out. So you're going to pushing yourself to really take ownership of the work that you're doing, and also push it in ways that it wasn't designed to do. I think it's where you get the most from it. So really going through and taking ownership of a shot, like making it your own and going through and applying it. That way you've got a unique shot that no one else has, instead of a lot of training material that everyone else has. And on top of that, you've able to kind of personalize it and run into your own problems along the way too. So I think that that's really beneficial, to be able to have a shot that you're pulling all this stuff from to work on and make it your own thing. And the journey you go through there it's a lot more rewarding, but it's a lot more challenging too, rather than just doing material. So I hope that kind of answers it a little bit, but I'd rather, if I'm ever learning new software, I don't just jump in and start kind of fiddling around. I usually have a goal. Like I'll have a shot that I want to do, and I'm going to start going through the shot in that software, in that tool, whatever it might be. And that way there's an outcome, there's a goal, there's something I'm trying to achieve. And, it's a lot easier than just trying to play with pedals and tools and see interesting things, but not really pushing them towards a need or an end goal that you've set. So I'm always going to come in with a specific goal in mind that I want to get something from. Okay, so Zach Wiley was saying, what advice would you give to a student who's just starting out in visual effects and wanting to pursue a career in the film industry? More specifically, what kind of portfolio should they be building? So again, this one is such an open-ended question. I feel like I got to ask more questions to get really into the guts of it all, but I figure it's well worthwhile saying that, like, I think in the beginning, especially if you're saying visual effects, because as soon as you say visual effects, I think that you've got to put in the time. You can't go in expecting you're going to get a job a month or 2 months from now. You've got to realize it's an investment. And it's one that along the way, there are going to be people who realize it's not for them. It's too much work or whatever it might be. They're not passionate enough, because you've got to be to really make it. You've got to be passionate. You got to put in the time. You got to be obsessed about what you're doing. Or after a while, when push comes to shove, you're not willing to put in the work to get the final output. So it's tricky. It's definitely one of those things that I think in the beginning, it's about just playing around and getting excited about what you're doing and finding a way for it to connect with you, so that way you're enjoying what you're doing. You're being sucked into it rather than trying to beat it into doing what you want it to do. I think that's the real critical part of this. And then later, when it's time to actually get a job, it becomes easier, because at that point you're like, all right, I feel like it's time, rather than you having that pressure of, I've got to get an output from this. It's more, I feel like I'm good enough now. I'm going to start like working on my portfolio. I'm already putting out a lot of content around your demo reel and portfolio and what to do with that. But I do think that less is more. So in other words, I would just focus on like one really good shot and make it everything it can be, rather than trying to do too many. Like, I think quality over quantity. In other words, work on one good shot or one good sequence of 3 shots, whatever it might be, but just really take ownership of that and make it everything it can be. The most important thing is to take it all the way through from start to finish. Okay, so that way you can show that you can do the work, because otherwise hiring people, it's always a gamble whether or not they're going to work out. And it's a very expensive gamble. So being able to demonstrate that you can sit down tomorrow in a chair and do the work is more important than being able to show the diversity of what you can do. So, I would definitely choose doing 1 shot, 3 shots, really taking ownership of them, taking them all the way through, rather than just, doing little tests and things like that don't completely demonstrate like that you could finish a shot and get it final. Okay, so another one, this is from Instagram, so I just got his username, but it's Bishop2 said, "Hey Alan, first of all, I love the show. Thank you. And what tips would you give to a runner in VFX, especially about trying to hit the next level and become a junior artist or similar? All the best, Miles." So thanks, Miles. Okay, so I was talking with Kathleen Ruffalo about this the other day at Framestore, because they have a runner program. They have an internship and a runner program. A runner comes from the UK, where you would be a tape runner or a film runner. You would usually be someone who would, work their way up from the bottom. And it's just more the structure. It's kind of like you got to put in the hard yards at the beginning. I feel like a lot of us, especially in 2018, especially in certain countries, we can kind of like land in really great positions from the get-go. Whereas traditionally, you would need to, suck it up and do the bottom dwelling for a little bit. You would need to work your way up, improve yourself over time, and earn your stripes. And then you could go into all these other opportunities down the line. So things have definitely changed, but I kind of think it's cool that some places still have something like that. So whether it's a runner, whether it's a client service person, whatever it might be, a tape operator, usually smart people will do whatever it takes to get their foot in the door. Okay, from there you can start to move around. I've met people who think that those jobs are beneath them, so they only want to go work at ILM or Weta or something really grandiose from the get-go. And I have a classic story I've mentioned dozens of times, but 2 of my friends back in the day, Kate and Rob. Rob was someone who was turning down jobs left and right because he only wanted to work for Weta. And meanwhile, Kate she wanted to work as a compositor. She came in as a client service person, would fetch coffees and make sure the client has everything they need. And, you fast forward 2 or 3 years, like she's done the hard yards and she's now like a senior compositor. He still hasn't had his first job. This is a long time ago now, but because he kept turning away work while she started at the bottom, but at least she got her foot in the door and was able to kind of work her way up from there. So I think that to me kind of sums it all up so well, that you got to just get your foot in the door. It doesn't matter what you're doing, as long as you get there. Be a render wrangler, it doesn't matter. Just get your foot in the door, be smart about it, and then move up from there. So I like what Miles was saying, because I think that at least you've got your foot in. Now, what do you do with that? I think that the most critical thing is to communicate what you want to do, because no one's psychic and no one's going to think of you, for ways to help you if you don't communicate what you want, what you need. If you're able to say to someone like, I'd love to work in 3D one day, the more that you say that, the more that they're visibly aware of that. And it means that, assuming they're a good manager, occasionally they're going to say, well, hey, like, look, do you want to come in and hang out with the 3D people this afternoon? Or do you want to sit in on this meeting? Do you want to stick around tonight and play around with the 3D software or ask questions? The more that you're putting in the hard work and you're doing your job, but you're also communicating one day where you'd like to be, having that trajectory that you want to go, the more people can connect the dots and start to kind of see opportunities for you and make them happen. But if you don't communicate that to anyone, then at the end of the day, it's like, all right, well, you're a client person, you're a runner. They're just going to see you as that. They're not going to think of ways that they can help you because you haven't helped them by communicating where you want to be. So I think communication is more than anything the best thing, because you can plant that seed with everyone that you'd love to, do this or that. I think another thing is just to learn on your own, because asking for things is one thing, but if you can actually go to them and say, hey, by the way, I've been working in my spare time on my own 3D animation demo reel, and I'd love to get some advice. Like, do you have 5 minutes later this week sometime? No one's going to say no to that. If you say, do you have 5 minutes right now, it's kind of putting people on the spot. But if you're able to say, hey, sometime this week, can I just sit down and show you my work? If anything, what you're doing is you've got a chance to kind of sell your skills to that person. And I think that that's really beneficial as well, to go off and do your own thing, have the initiative to start learning this stuff, knowing that you have a resource there that you can ask people questions occasionally, like, hey, I've been working on this technical thing, like, how would I do it? And they're like, oh, just use Spline. Okay, great. And you go off and do it. Whatever it might be, like, the more that you're asking questions, the more that you're showing that you have that incentive, the more that people are going to start to see, like, wow, you got some talent there. If you can show off what you're doing, all that kind of stuff. Figure out ways that aren't intrusive. They're not going to be a time suck for other people, because no matter how cheap you are, having you take up other people's time is expensive. So you got someone who charges $150 an hour. Doesn't matter if you're $10 an hour. That's going to be expensive when you start asking for their time. So keep that in mind. But I think that being ambitious without overbearing, you don't want to over ask too much. But yeah, I think that communicating what you want, and then so that way it's like, one day I'd like to do this. In other words, I have ambition. I want to do this one day. And then just seeing where you can get into those opportunities, I think, is really important. So that's another thing too. And I think that's way more valuable, because this way you're already doing it. You're already learning. And at one point, eventually you're going to be good enough that they're going to say, hey, well, look, we need a junior on this job. Do you want to help out and do some stuff like a couple hours a week or whatever? Just wait for that big opportunity. But I think it's not about ever waiting around for permission from other people. Like, not about waiting for other people to knight you and say, we're going to give you that chance. It's about doing it until the point where you're good enough that it's just a matter of bridging over, because you're already in. Now it's about transitioning to a different department. And that's why communicating, being upfront with them and talking to them about, what you want to do, and just letting them know that this is your ideal goal, that one day you want to do this. Going and doing the work yourself, having a real, working on this stuff day and night in your spare time, and then occasionally showing them, asking questions occasionally when it's non-intrusive, where you're not taking up a lot of time. That's really important too, because that way they're going to see that you've got the initiative, you're already doing it. And then it's more about just, the more that you're doing it, the more that you're showing your work, because you've got access to these people, eventually the right opportunity is going to come along. But if you don't communicate, if you don't say, hey, I want to do this one day, they're never going to think about you in that way. They're not going to connect the dots and be like, oh, we could have used you on this job or whatever. So the more that you can communicate what you want, where you want to be, the better off you're going to be in the long run. But at the same time, the more that you're already doing it, rather than waiting around, asking them for a chance to get trained up or whatever, like, just go and do it and show that you're already capable, though, that you're already learning. And that way people are going to get excited to, as you get better, to look for the chance to kind of bring you in and give you that opportunity to work nights doing some stuff or helping out render wrangling, whatever it might be, So use that opportunity and leverage what you've got so far to kind of take it to the next level. And eventually bridge over into a different department rather than, going to them saying, well, hey, can I get some training, or can I sit in this? Can I ask questions? Because all you're going to be seen as someone that is taking up a lot of other people's time, rather than saying like, hey, I'm doing all this cool stuff and I had a quick question about this. Is it okay if I, asked you when you have a moment, can I shoot you an email, whatever? And that way it's more they're willing to take you under their wing and they can see that you're an investment that they want to invest in. So hopefully that helps. Okay, so another one from Instagram. So I'm going to butcher this, but Arjun Magu. Again, everyone has different usernames, so I'm hopefully able to catch some of them. But I would like to know your opinion on how much time it will take to get to expert level in visual effects and what approaches I need to apply. So I left this in here again just because it is one of those ones where it's like, look, how long's a piece of string? Like, how long till I'm, an expert in effects or visual effects? So out of all the questions, I feel like this is one that is worthwhile addressing, because I think that we all have that rush that we want to like be a pro within a month or two. And really, I've been doing this for 20 years. I don't know everything there is about 3D, and it's always changing. It's always improving. If anything, every year there's just so much more stuff that you can never keep up. I think that it's important to, as I've always stated, start out as a generalist, learn everything you can, and then later on niche down and continue to kind of niche down, specialize, and then eventually grow out again from there. It's very kind of sporadic in that sense. But I think that if you're ever coming into visual effects expecting that you're going to get a job within 2 months or whatever, and then you're going to be a pro by this long, it's just not how it works. But if I were to give advice, like, just to clarify that, it's not how it works, because you need to invest time and it's such a long journey. But if I was to give advice on how to really speed it up and make the most of your time, I'm always going to say to surround yourself with amazing people. In other words, like, find those mentors, find those people around you that you can grow better around, that they can pull you up. I'd say to always be experimenting, to always be pushing yourself, learn everything. Don't just do simple things like try and do finished pieces all the time, try and do shots, if you're doing visual effects, then try and shoot live action, try and composite it, try and put all your stuff in there, try and show the end result. I think the more that you are exposed to the entire pipeline, the more that you have that bird's eye view of how it all works, the better off you're going to be. I think the big thing is, and because I've gotten so many questions, probably like 30 or 40, that were like, which is the best software? And I want to do a video on that, because I think it's such an annoying question about which is the best software out there, that I actually want to do a video on it now just to cover it. But I think the key thing is that if you want to learn software, learn one thing, but learn it inside out. And then learning the other ones is going to be easy because you have that understanding, that core understanding. But if you go and learn them all at once, you're going to know them all about 10%. And that, that's not really going to help you. So again, the more that you learn, the better off you're going to be. But the real critical thing is to have goals. Okay, I think that more than anything, the more that you have goals and you have a timeline applied to that, the better off that you're going to be able to accelerate the entire process, because you're going to have that clear direction. You're going to be able to measure the success you're having. So, the way I look at it is, if you're in a car and you're looking straight ahead, you're probably going to feel like you're not moving very fast, because you're just getting slowly towards that goal. But if you look out the side, you can see you're whipping past everything really quick. It's the same way with measuring your goals. If you have that understanding of where you're at right now and where you want to be, and then you've broken it down to small enough goals along the way, you've set a timeline, so that way you can say, okay, I'm here now, within 6 months I want to be here, a year here. Then you can start to see 3 months out, like, am I on my way to hitting that 6-month goal, or am I behind? If so, I better pick up the pace. So the better understanding of how quickly you're moving through the bigger goal to where you really want to be. I think it's really critical. I always feel like people kind of, their eyes glaze over a little bit when they hear about setting goals and all this, but I mean, how else are you going to get anything done? How else are you going to achieve anything? Financial goals is still a goal. If you want to make 100K within 3 years of working, or, I want to go from starting out at $15 an hour, I want to be at $50 an hour within 5 years. How do I exponentially grow at least $10 an hour every single year? Who do I need to speak to? What are my goals? What do I need to do? The more that you can talk to the employer who is in charge of paying you and saying, well, look, I have a goal of next year, I want to make $25 an hour. So tell me what I need to do between now and next year to make myself valuable or worth $25 an hour to you. And if you hit all those goals, then, they're going to give it to you. So the more you have goals to drive you, the more that you can measure it, the better you can see whether you're going to achieve them or not. I always say to attack with urgency and fail fast. In other words, I'm going to do everything as quick as I can. I'm going to condense my goals down. If I have a year-long goal, I'm going to do it in 3 months. And that way I'm always hitting it hard, but I can also see whether or not I am actually hitting my goals properly, or if I'm not. So in other words, if I'm failing at that, if the direction I'm taking is not working, I'm going to get the failure results a lot quicker as well, and realize that I should abandon the direction I'm taking and try a different route, whatever it's going to take me to continue to make that progression, rather than saying a year from now I want to be wherever I want to be, and then a year into it I'm like, oh yeah, I didn't really hit that goal. Like 3 months, I can definitely see whether or not I'm making it, and or 3 weeks, however long, because I'm attacking that goal or all my goals with urgency, and I'm failing fast. I'm aiming to either hit them or fail and redirect myself. So goals are everything. Like, goals are going to be the thing that's going to make you have that clear direction about what you want. And I think that most of us don't have that clarity, and that's why we're not getting the success that we need, because we don't have that clarity with what we really want to be doing. Okay, so I'm just going to do one or two more here. I had one from Eddie Gomez. So I'm just going to generalize this one, but Eddie was saying that he has a question. It's more related to business, but as an artist, do you typically sign contracts with the employer? And if so, do you supply your own, or do you work with theirs? And do you add anything else into their contract? So again, I think it's more about context. Typically, if I'm going to work on site and they have a contract, they're going to give me a standard contract, and you can go over it. If there's anything you disagree to, you can say like, hey, I'm not comfortable with this. I know, like, working at ILM, one of the things that they have is that they own the rights to your likeness. So in other words, if they wanted to go make a video game about you, they could, because they own you now. But that's more to do with the fact that they do a lot of filming and documentaries, and just other stuff is always behind the scenes is going on. So they don't want to have to give you a release form every single time that your head pops up in the kitchen while they're shooting or whatever. But they'll also say, do you have any intellectual property? Because, if so, then state it in the contract here. Otherwise, let's say you go and make a water tool after you leave there, and they might say, well, look, you came up with that idea while you're at ILM, or was inspired by the stuff you'd seen at ILM, whatever it might be. And this is standard at a lot of bigger places that deal with a lot of intellectual property. And all they're doing is they want to comfortably be able to let you be in their environment without worrying about the fact that you might take their ideas or their intellectual property and go off and do something in a different space with it. So at the same time, if you already made a water tool, then you need to disclose it there, so that way you're protected. So there's certain things like that, like, depending on the situations, they're all going to be unique. But, generally, I don't give clients contracts. It really depends. If it is like a bigger project, or there's a lot of money involved, then I might give them something to sign. I'm actually looking at maybe putting out a few contracts on my website soon that you guys can download and mess around with. So that way you can give that to a client, just to say, like, you agree to these milestone payments and everything else. I think that these days, though, email really kind of counts as a contract. So in a lot of ways, as long as I have it in an email, then I can go to court with them, or, whatever it might be. Like, I know that it's at least covered. There's a paper trail there. Clients might come to me and say, hey, here's a contract, sign this. And I might say, well, look, I don't agree to this, or can you maybe tweak this? Usually I'm not too worried about that, but I work with the same clients a lot, so I usually have that trust with them. I think it is good practice to, rather than trusting your friends, to treat everything like a business, but I'm not too, sticky with that kind of stuff. But there are other times that I'll make agreements with people where they might send over a contract, I'll get a lawyer to look at it. The lawyer comes back with like an amended contract that they send back to them. They can look over it all and either agree to it or make changes again. And bit by bit, it gets revised. The only thing about that is it gets very expensive very quickly. Typically, with contracts, they have to hold up with lawyers in law, and it's not going to be a matter of like, well, I'm going to write it in layman terms. It's got to be something that's actually tied to specific practices within law or corporate law. So it means that typically you're going to need to write it in lawyer speak for it to be valid in a lot of ways. So as soon as you get lawyers involved, it can cost thousands of dollars right off the bat. And the more back and forth, the more iterations, like every time they look at it over, it might be $200, $300 an hour just to get that revised. Just keep that in mind. I don't care too much about it, but like I said, the paper trail for me is really important. So let's say I get on the phone with a client and I agree to a bunch of stuff, then what I'll do is once the call's done, I'll follow up with an email and I'll say, hey, by the way, it was really great just chatting with you. Just to confirm, I'm going to be delivering these 3 shots by this date. And let's do 2 reviews in between. I know we agreed to next Wednesday and the following Wednesday, these dates. And just to be clear, you guys agreed to pay 50% upfront and the other 50% upon delivery. Let me know if any of that wasn't clear or if there's anything you want to add. Otherwise, looking forward to working with you. Just by doing a friendly follow-up to anything they said, all you're doing is you're setting it in stone, but you're also having a paper trail because when they reply back and say, yes, sounds great, then, you've got that to cover your butt. Because the amount of times that there's been conversations on the phone and then it's like he said, she said later on, it just, it doesn't matter about lawyers. It can just be communication. I think it's better just to be able to communicate and cover your butt and say, well, look, I sent you an email on this date and we agreed to this. So it's been this long. I haven't received my payment. It's been 2 weeks, so I can't work anymore. Instead of like, hey, you said you're going to pay me soon. It's like, well, we'll get around to it, or, whatever stuff that can happen, because it does. I think that is more important, just to be crystal clear, because people forget what gets said on the phone and it can make you look stupid bringing stuff up. And it's like, no, we didn't agree to that. And it's like, no, you did. So it's just a lot easier just to have it all confirmed in an email. So whenever I get a call, I say, hey, really great chatting with you. Just to confirm, I'm going to send it to you next Friday. And it's going to cost this much money. If you have any questions, let me know. And if you want them to reply, so that way you can acknowledge that they agreed, then you say, before I get started, just please hit reply and just confirm that this is correct. I don't want to start until, I just make sure that, all of this is 100% concrete. And that way, 24 hours go by, you can follow up again and say, hey, just waiting for you to reply. Can you just quickly confirm? And then I'll get started. And that way, it's kind of like they need to take action before you can start working on a job. Just simple things like that. That's, for me, standard practice. It's something I don't even think about anymore. It's just I'm always doing that. Same way if I do a meeting or let's say if I went for a job interview or something, I'm always going to follow up and say, hey, by the way, it was really great speaking with you. If you need anything else, let me know, blah, blah, blah. I think that's so critical, just to have that follow up, and it's going to make you fresh in their minds. And I actually have a few friends who they will not hire someone unless they follow up, because it's just that smart to show that you've got that mentality, rather than kind of like going to an interview and then disappearing. Yeah, I think it's really critical, and it's really just should be second nature to you to do all that. So like I said, I don't follow up on, I don't do contracts as much as I probably should, but usually it's because things are so fast paced that we just need to get stuff going. And there's no time for going back and forth with lawyers and all that kind of stuff. Usually I'm not too worried about that stuff. But like I said, email these days will hold up in court. It is good to protect your butt. So it's good to have everything with a paper trail rather than just phone calls. And that's usually how I'll go about doing it. And I'm just going to do one more, which is from Troy Buckley, who's part of my team. But he was just saying, how do you stay motivated in pursuing your goals, especially when those goals are not immediately achievable? I think it's a really good question because, again, like some of us, we want to have those grandiose goals. I mean, hopefully all of us do. A lot of the time that can feel impossible. It can feel like, well, I can never do that because it's so far off. I think it's good to have those someday goals, but more importantly, being able to break them down. And, they might look unachievable, but the more you break it down, the more you can make those sets, the chains of achievable goals that all work towards that. I think that way, at least you're getting some wins from it. And I think more importantly, the more that you do that, the more you can say, well, look, what am I doing today to get to that impossible goal? And a lot of the time you might realize, like, well, I'm not doing anything to actually get towards that goal, or I'm going the complete opposite direction. The more that you're able to align yourself with it, or realize that you need to start taking steps today. And that's why it's not achievable, because you feel like you're not making any progress because you're not actually doing anything right now to work towards that goal. That becomes a game changer in itself. But the goals that do seem impossible, I think it's more about breaking it down and figuring out, well, why is it impossible? What about it makes it seem unachievable? And more importantly, like, what are the key things that would need to happen? So forget the mindset that you might have that it isn't achievable, and saying, well, let's just for a moment pretend that it is achievable. What would that look like? If I were to, do the impossible, if I had done it, let's say, what do I need to have done for that to happen? Nothing is impossible. It's just a matter of changing the mindset. I think a lot of times if you can't connect the dots, then it is a matter of saying, well, what if it wasn't impossible? Then what would that look like? And then you can start to reverse engineer a game plan and break them down into small enough chunks that everything's achievable, because it's just a matter of taking that next step. So the next 3 months are going to be doing this bit by bit. It's all going to accumulate and it's going to lead towards something. So hopefully this helped. These are just scratching the surface, the amount of questions I've gotten. I want to answer more, but I'm hoping that this is just a fun experiment that hopefully you can get something from. In addition, I think that I'm hoping this kind of spawns questions in your mind that you want to ask as well. And I'd love to include those in future ones. So send me an email at amckay@allanmckay.com and let me know. And I'll definitely include these in the future. For the time being, though, I hope that these questions kind of helped a little bit, kind of answer some of the burning questions you might have had. And I'll definitely do more of these in the future and hopefully be a bit more structured. Definitely there's a few time constraints for myself this week. I'm going to be out of town for the next few weeks working on a few different things. So I kind of had to get this done right away. But I'm hoping that this has been really beneficial. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that. If you want to check out the show notes, go to allanmckay.com/138, so 138, and you'll be able to read through a lot of the insights, quotes, and things like that there, as well as links to my YouTube and everything else. Like I said, if you have a question that you want answered, simply shoot me an email with the subject heading, Ask Me Anything, and I'll try to address the AMA that I do on the podcast. I'd like to do these regularly, so let me know what you think. And I'll just say registration for my mentorship is about 2 weeks out. So if you want to get notified about that ahead of everyone else, because there already is a waiting list, simply go to allanmckay.com/inside and sign up to the VIP Inner Circle email list there, and you'll get notification ahead of time. I'm also putting out a lot of free training, other really cool stuff coming up. That being said, that's it for now. I will be back next episode. Until then, rock on.